where is it now? Who's controlling the energy flows out of the Middle East? These are measurable phenomenon. They're not susceptible to Ben Shapiro being like, wagging his eyebrows at you and telling you you're an anti-Semite. It doesn't matter what he says. And so it puts them in a very tough spot. How do they respond? Well, we know from the Iraq War, not a single person is ever going to admit he was wrong, ever. One of the most liberating things I've ever done in my life was admit that I was wrong about the Iraq War. And I was ashamed of it. I remain ashamed of it. But once you say, I was wrong and I'm sorry, this tremendous weight lifts off your shoulders and you don't have to lie anymore. And that is what liberation actually is. None of these people will do that. None. They feel no compunction and they won't. So instead what they're doing is they're just going bonkers on the attack because, and this is a precept that Israel lives by, the best defense is a strong offense. So rather than like debating you on the terms or admitting that they were wrong in their forecasts and there was no popular uprising in Iran and we've lost control of the world's energy, they're going to say, Piers Morgan, you're a Nazi. Megyn Kelly, you're a Nazi. And you're just like, what? That is a kind of insulation that they're constructing around themselves to prevent, well, any kind of soul searching about how did I get it so wrong? And all these people died because I was wrong. They don't want to deal with that. But it also allows them just like keep going on to the next war of conquest or the next satanic disaster that they'll back, which they will.
Have you spoken to President Trump since the war began?
I just through proxies. He called me names or said I was too dumb to understand MAGA or something. It wasn't, from my perspective, a real attack. I can't. I admit my weaknesses up front. Okay, I like pizza, which is wrong. I like Donald Trump, which is increasingly hard to defend, but I do. And I don't anticipate any kind of personal tiff with Trump. I think he was in an impossible spot. I think it's very obvious now that the U.S. president, under our current system, which I pray changes soon, doesn't have the latitude that people thought he had. Like presidents can't just make whatever decision they want in the interest of their country. There are other forces hemming them in. We don't have sovereignty in a real way. Clearly we don't. If we're following a country of 9 million people into a war that could displace us as the dominant superpower, we don't have sovereignty, I mean, by definition. And I think every president has felt that since John F. Kennedy was murdered. And clearly they all have. And they've acted within it, with wisdom or not, but they're still acting within boundaries that they didn't set, that no American did. And it's just time to change that system, not because you hate Israel or you're anti-Semitic. I mean, I'm not anti-Semitic. I don't hate Israel at all. I'm never going to. But that's not the way a sovereign country behaves or should have to behave. And Americans have earned the right to live under a government that makes decisions on their behalf for their benefit. I mean, it's that simple.
What Trump said about you was quite revealing, actually, because he said, Tucker's lost his way. He's not MAGA. MAGA is saving our country. MAGA is making our country great again. MAGA is America first, and Tucker is none of these things. And Tucker's really not smart enough to understand that. Now, having been on the receiving end of Trump's savage rhetoric from time to time, that is pretty low base for him. But it was an interesting point about what constitutes MAGA, because, of course, there are many people with pretty short to mid-term memories who can remember Trump campaigning so vociferously to his MAGA base before the last election on saying, look, we're going to be America first. We're not going to go marching into Middle Eastern countries anymore. We're not going to wage foreign wars. We're not going to interfere in other countries. And we're going to fix the economy in the United States. We're going to get the cost of living prices down. We're going to end inflation. And it seems to me that it might be that President Trump has either forgotten what he said or wants to try and reframe what MAGA really means. Because if you're a MAGA voter, you must be slightly mystified. You may not want to admit it publicly because you think it betrays Trump, but you must be mystified that within a year of winning back the White House, the guy that campaigned on not going into the Middle East again, not waging foreign wars, focusing on America first and the US economy, has now launched the biggest war in the Middle East in my lifetime that America has waged. And that has inevitably sparked the biggest economic meltdown we've seen as a consequence of a war, not least because, as you said, about the Strait of Hormuz and the damage that is inflicting, and the simultaneous attacks on the Gulf states and all the fallout from that. So it seems to me that he may want to come after you for not really understanding MAGA, but I'm not sure that many in the MAGA movement, if they're really honest, can be comfortable with what is happening here.
I mean, look, I've never claimed to be a genius because I'm not a genius. And so it's entirely possible there are motives I don't understand. I certainly tried to understand in many conversations with him, but maybe I didn't. I'll keep that possibility open. And as for what MAGA is, it's a slippery definition. I mean, I think George Orwell wrote a bunch of books about this, including Animal Farm. Definitions change. I remember someone pointing to a picture of 100% black people once and telling me that's diversity. Or thinking, looks like uniformity, actually. Like, what do these words mean? I don't know. I do know what America First means because it's a much more precise description. And it means you put America first in every decision that you make as an American leader. And this, by that definition, falls far short. In fact, it is by definition not America First because the administration has already said we followed the lead of a foreign country in doing this. We put their interest first. And I think most people, no matter how they feel about Israel, whether they love it or hate it, or it doesn't matter. It's nothing to do with this specific country. It has to do with any country that might be leading us around, particularly to our destruction, and putting its interests before ours. Our leaders can never agree to that, period, because it is the opposite of America First. So, you know, whatever Trump said about me, I didn't take it personally. I suspect he doesn't really mean it because I've always gotten along with him for 30 years. I expect I always will. But on this one specific question, America First, we can say this was not America First. This was at least America Second. I do think it's obvious that Israel understood, because they're not stupid, that the effect of this war would be to get the United States out of the Middle East. And unfortunately, I think that will be the effect. And they want that because why would you want a dominant power in your region telling you what to do and hemming you in, as the U.S. has to Israel? No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. We may not mean it, but we still hassle them or used to hassle them over, say, the West Bank settlements. They want the U.S. out, and they're moving to India. Okay, that's their calculation. But how is that good for me as an American? It's not. So America First. Yeah, this was not America First, whatever it was.
Well, what is very interesting is that I can't remember a war that once it started where American forces have been committed by an American president where there hasn't been majority support for that war in the United States in the polling. This is the first time where there isn't. There's a majority of a lack of support for it. Americans are they're not buying this war. They don't want it. They don't really understand it. And they're very concerned about the consequences.
The only people who support this war are those born between 1946 and 1964 who watch a lot of Fox News. That's it. I'm not attacking them. By the way, they're Americans. They're my equals as Americans. I love a lot of them. But their perspective on the U.S. and the world is very different from everyone else's. Very, very different. And so they're not the ones who got Donald Trump elected, actually. The people who got Donald Trump elected are the people who hadn't voted for Republicans before or even voted at all before. And they're like Joe Rogan listeners, or people who use nicotine pouches. They're Hispanic voters. They're young black men. They're non-traditional Republican voters who voted for Trump because he promised not to keep doing the same thing. And one of the things he promised not to do again was to hand operational authority over to Benjamin Netanyahu, as other presidents have. We don't want any more of that. Why would we? And we're not going to make Mark Levin or Ben Shapiro, who have almost no organic support in the media world, like no one really watches them. We're not going to hand control of our foreign policy over to people like that who don't know anything and who don't have America's interests at heart or even in mind. So breaking faith with those people, those voters, the ones who actually got Trump elected and whose coalition promised a new day in American politics, that's a big deal. It's a betrayal on the level that I don't think people who aren't in those groups can understand. Like, this is heartbreaking. And by the way, a lot of those people really like Trump. They like his style. They think he's hilarious. He's brave. You know, he's just like, they like him. And to see this is, it's so wounding. It hurts. I've got a bunch who work for me. I'm related to some, they're all Trump voters. And I talked to them in the last 24 hours. Boy, they're upset. They're not just mad, like, I hate Israel. That's not the impulse. They're definitely starting to hate Israel. Why wouldn't they? Our relationship with Israel is hurting us gravely. It's getting Americans killed. So they're mad, but it's more than mad. It's, I can't believe he did this to us. You know, I feel just so depressed about it.
How politically damaging could it be? We've got the midterms coming up in November. There were already a lot of reports that it was likely the Republicans would lose control of the House. Now I'm reading more reports that it may be that they even lose the Senate, which would render Trump, notwithstanding all his kind of mystical powers to avoid the normal norms of politics in America, if you don't have control of the House and the Senate, you are a lame duck president, period, end. There's pretty much nothing more you can do.
That's true now. I mean, I think the conversation has moved on from the president. It's not an attack on him. He still, of course, is commander-in-chief. He threatened some kind of mass destruction of Iran yesterday. It sounded like a nuclear strike to me. So, like, he has the capacity, to make decisions. He's the president, elected president. However, as a political matter, that era is over. For the reasons I just described. I didn't want that to be true, but the coalition is permanently fractured. He was not elected because of Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro did not get Donald Trump elected. A lot of the people Trump is now attacking got Donald Trump elected, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, et cetera. So that coalition is done. The Republican Party, as currently constituted, will not continue, because it doesn't represent its voters. It doesn't even try to represent its voters. In fact, it shows open hostility to its voters. So nothing like that can continue for very long because it doesn't make any sense. It's a bicycle with square wheels. It's ludicrous. So the question is, what comes next? And I do think it's possible to recreate some version of the 2020 Trump coalition or the 2024 Trump coalition on the basis of his core promise, which is just put the country first. And like, you're going to make mistakes and we're not exactly sure how to fix certain things, but let's all try. And by the way, let's be united as we do it. The ugliest thing to come out of the Mark Levin-controlled Republican Party, which I find repulsive, and I just want to say I'll do everything I can to stop that party from becoming, any more powerful than it is try to stoke religious conflict in the United States. Attacking people for being like a different religion. We hate the Muslims, really. How is that different from we hate the Jews? Well, it's not in any sense different at all. And I would say, just thinking long-term about the United States, the greatest threat is not even the loss of the US dollar as the reserve currency globally. The greatest threat is tribalism, where the country fractures into warring tribes. And people like Levin are doing their best to create that. And it's totally immoral and dangerous. It will result in violence. Their endless harping on this anti-Semitism question is part of that. Anti-Semitism is immoral. It's every bit as immoral as anti-white bias, which is encoded in the federal government, by the way, and every elite institution in the United States discriminates against whites. That is every bit as immoral as anti-Semitism. That's every bit as immoral as hating anybody else on the basis of their bloodline, because it's a universal principle. It applies to every human being. It's a human right to be treated as an individual and not be held responsible for the sins of your parents. That is a human right in the West. And people like Levin and Shapiro don't recognize that because they are not Western in their orientation. They think that rights only apply to the groups they favor. And that idea, that evil idea, which was the basis of Nazism, by the way, that is the thing that will destroy the United States. And the next leadership of this country, whoever it is, has to articulate we're all American citizens. We must be treated equally under the law. Bias against one group is no better or worse than bias against another group, period. Anti-Semitism. Where were you when the ADL was openly promoting anti-white hate? So now the ADL is an authority on bias crimes? They've abetted bias crimes. They are currently abetting bias crimes. The ADL and every single one of these groups has an absolute moral obligation to treat anti-white hate, which is the only kind encoded in U.S. law right now, as every bit the threat of anti-Semitic hate. How are they different? They're not. And no one will say that until someone does say that, you will not reunite this country. And if this continues, the country will fracture.
As we're talking, with glorious coincidence, Ben Shapiro has been releasing various clips on his social media platforms. One of them goes after me and Megyn Kelly. Me because he blew his gasket about Dave Smith appearing on my show launched into my show, said it was just Jerry Springer. As I like Jerry Springer, I knew him very well. I worked with him on America's Got Talent. He's actually a very smart guy. Used to be a news anchor, mayor of Cincinnati. Really interesting guy, much smarter than Ben Shapiro. So I took that as a compliment. But I responded. He didn't like the response. He's come back. He's called me Jerry Springer again. He's called me a click whore. He says I'm a pussy bitch, and he goes on and on and on. I don't actually want to play the clip about me, because he's trying to basically suggest that if you platform anybody that he hasn't approved as a person that can speak about Israel, in other words, someone who's a propagandist for Israel who will not criticize Israel, then you yourself are promoting anti-Semitism, therefore you're an anti-Semite, therefore you're basically borderline Nazi. But I do want to play what he said about you, because he's been railing the same stuff against you, which I don't think anyone who has watched this interview so far will have concluded, oh yeah, Tucker sounds like a raging anti-Semite. He sounds like a Nazi. You couldn't sound less like either of those things, and yet he's just posted this. Let's take a look.
I started originally criticizing Tucker Carlson for his economic programs back in 2018. And then in the more modern post-Fox iteration of Tucker, I started criticizing Tucker over his going to Russia to sniff the bread and kiss Vladimir Putin's ass. My generalized critique of Tucker in the last few months has been, one, he hosted and glossed a Nazi, Nick Fuentes, which doesn't have to do with Israel. It has to do with glazing a Nazi, Nick Fuentes. And then I did a speech at Heritage in which I went through the fact that Tucker Carlson is in no way, shape, or form a traditional conservative, that he's a conspiratorial near-anarchist at this point, seeking to tear down the fundamental ideas and institutions of the United States. Go watch the Heritage speech. I believe Israel is mentioned once in a 35-minute speech that is all about Tucker's general view of the world and how it does not represent traditional conservatism in any way. I think that Tucker Carlson has fostered anti-Semitism by having on some of the worst anti-Semites in America over and over and over, and then essentially laundering their views.
So it's the same attack line, essentially, about the anti-Semitism, which is if you or I or Megyn Kelly, whoever it may be, dares to platform anybody who is critical of Israel, let's be clear. I mean, in my case, I've always made it crystal clear, as you have in this interview, I have absolutely no problem with Israel, the state of Israel, with Israelis, with Jewish people, many Jewish friends. It's nothing to do with that. I reserve the right as a journalist to criticize any government, and I particularly reserve the right to criticize the Israeli government, given what it's been doing in the last few years, as any decent journalist should, not least because in Gaza, for example, the Israeli government continues to ban international journalists from operating there or even going on into Gaza to verify what they've been up to. That alone should be a warning sign to everybody that the Israeli government has probably been doing things in Gaza it doesn't want people to know. But I took the same view. You know, I oppose the Iraq War. We've talked about this before. But I led the media campaign in the UK against the Iraq War, even though my own brother ended up fighting in it. But I opposed it, and I think was vindicated by what happened afterwards, sadly. But I opposed it and took on Tony Blair, who was the then British Prime Minister, even though my newspaper was the Labour sympathetic newspaper, the Daily Mirror, to the Labour government. But I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do. It didn't mean that I hated British people or my country. In fact, quite the opposite. It meant that I wanted to help the British people and help my country from stumbling into a disaster. And I sense from you that your position about Iran is not driven by a hatred of Jews or Israelis or Israel. It is driven by a sense that you feel this is bad for America and Americans, and probably bad for Israelis and Jewish people as well.
Yeah, I mean, I care about the United States. Again, I was born here. My family's been here hundreds of years. I care about it. I don't expect I'll be able to save it, but I want to do whatever I can to make it better and to avoid obvious disasters like this one. I don't want to attack Ben Shapiro, other than to say, like, that guy went to Harvard, and so did Bill Ackman. Like, at some point, you need to reassess. No, I'm serious, though. These are two of the most famous, richest people in our world. They both went to Harvard. I know them both. Not geniuses, like, not even close to geniuses. And so, like, our system itself is not producing wise people or even very knowledgeable people. Like Ben Shapiro had no idea there was a strait at the end of the Persian Gulf and why it was important. You need a system that produces superior people. The British Empire did a pretty good job of this. The United States before the Second World War did a pretty good job of this. We need to reassess our system. That's the first thing I would say. Second, you're right. This is absurd. I think I've actually even argued with you about Israel. I was taking a tougher position than you. You've been a defender of Israel.
Yeah.
That's why this is so crazy. He wants to talk about this in order to get, this is projected.